I'm Elisa Mortensen, and this is Undo Redo.
Hello, hello. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Undo Redo podcast. Okay, can we just talk about something that seriously messes with us in life and relationships? It's been quite fun for me lately. Can we just talk about something that seriously messes with us in life and relationships and daily routines? Dread. Dread is the one thing that gets me the most, and most of us struggle with this. So I just want to talk about it. But before we get to it, it's been quite fun for me to have a new fun ability to create the energy, to somehow muster up the energy, and I know exactly what I'm doing. But the energy that's needed to sustain myself, my work, to bring to all of you, my family, my friends, the things that I do. And this does not mean that I'm carrying everyone, you guys. This means quite the opposite, in fact. I am better at letting others manage themselves and what they're in charge of and not making it mean anything about me, which keeps me in a better energy. I don't get offended as often. I don't feel defensive as often. I'm not making up such dramatic stories that hurt me as often. My brain still offers it to me, I will say that. And I consider it sometimes and find myself going there, especially when I'm feeling tired or weak, or maybe more things are happening that want to take my energy in those ways. There's been many times that I've been faced with things, even just recently in the last 6 months or so, that were very, very hard, and I did crumble under its weight, and I allowed that event or circumstance to kind of crush me under its weight, and I felt the pains, the disappointment, the discouragement, and the failure of those things. But that's where it's so fun for me now. I drew a line with myself, and I made these commitments that I would no longer go to these certain depths of allowing events or circumstances to rob me of my power to that degree. So I no longer allow myself to be hurt in such a way. And it's because I know that the hurt wasn't coming from them. It was coming from my allowing it. All right. So this is so fun for me to try new things. And I'm going to talk about dread, because one of these new things is taking a closer look at dread. I'm talking about dread as that shrinking, like avoid at all cost feeling that shows up when your brain basically says, hey, want to watch a scary movie? I have an idea about the future that I just made up. Cool, here's a trailer. And you're like, no thanks. No thanks. Okay, but we're still going to watch it, is kind of how your brain says. And I hope that made sense. But for real, this happens. Dread is our mind imagining some giant hardship, and it creates such a massive and awful story that it completely dwarfs your reality. All right? I'm going to say that again. Dread is our mind imagining some giant hardship. It creates something so big and awful that it completely dwarfs reality. And it's bizarre. It hasn't even begun yet. We're not to the point that day or thing is even happening. So if we're being logical, it's probably not going to be as awful as we make it seem, but we still start mentally and emotionally reacting like it's a guaranteed event. How we know we do this is we start to brace ourselves. We start to tighten up and get anxious about it, and we feel it in our body long before it happens. We end up mentally exhausted from a battle that didn't even begin and hasn't become real yet. It's interesting how our bodies feel emotions because our mind calls it up. When we run through picturing how much we're going to hate it, you can kind of hear in your mind these stories that you create, like this will be so hard. And maybe even a voice will come to your mind and say a little bit like, I so do not want to do that. Nope, I do not want to do that. I am not looking forward to this. And you kind of expound on it. Now, to the extent that you have those thoughts, or the extent and the intensity that you'll feel it in your body. You'll see it come up at things like you glance at a calendar and there's a family event and your whole body's like, ugh, I don't want to deal with that drama or those people right now. Or if there's a group thing that you're supposed to be to in the community or at work, the dread sets in days before, just in anticipation of it. And the most typical dread that people feel and talk about that I've seen is the Sunday dread for Monday's workday. Sunday afternoon, you feel Monday's workday already looming over you, and it's real inside of you, even though you're not at work yet, because your mind is just spinning in all of those stories about it. The people at work are going to have their same irritating ways, the workload, and you're dreading it way before you get there because it hits you Sunday. Sometimes even Saturday, depending on how wrapped around your head and what patterns you have going for you. But dread shows up in tiny daily stuff. It's not always the big stuff and the big situations and circumstance. Let's not forget those never-ending chores that we have, the stuff that's in the house that needs to be taken care of, the pile of clutter you may keep walking past, the reports that are due at work, the charting or the deadlines, the fridge that needs wiping down, the kids' stuff. But I want to talk next about the conversations that you feel like having that are important, and then you feel dread about them. None of these things are like catastrophic. They're not life or death situations, right? But it's all kind of looming over you in a sense of dread. And I'd say that the conversation one is probably one of the real big kickers, because we have conversations with ourselves in our mind, and we have conversations with other people. One's with your spouse, one's with your parents, one's with your kids. Maybe it's about money. Maybe it's about some sort of scheduling event, something that's going to be tense or emotional or just plain exhausting that you figure, like that story you have around it creates the dread. So we dread it before one word is even said. Like long before, you could dread it for 3 months before you even bring it up. That's how interesting dread is. I think we don't dread these things because they're happening. We dread them because of what we think is going to happen when it comes along. Our minds are so powerful, you guys. It goes straight to the worst case scenario when we start acting like this version is a fact when it hasn't become a fact yet. It can be intimidating because our minds are powerful, and the imagination, the power behind imagination is the fight. We feel it. The overwhelm, we're there. The meltdown, the rejection, the anticipation of all these things. We walk around bracing. Our body braces for it the moment we're like, hey, this is going to be hard. Let's brace for it. And it gives us a horrible experience long before. That's pretty powerful. And most of the time that version doesn't happen, right? How many times do you like, this is going to be so horrible, and you're like, okay, that wasn't as bad as I thought. I would say 90+% of the time, most of the time, it's not as we ever thought it would be. And yet we still hand over all of our peace right now for however long to some story that our imagination created. How do we stop allowing dread to hijack our peace like that? We could hire it out. Just kidding. I wish we could. Unfortunately, it doesn't just stop on its own. It doesn't disappear just because you've listened to this podcast or read a self-help book. It doesn't just go away because you're trying to be more positive and learn new things. And you think, oh, that makes sense. So you're going to it's just going to click in place tomorrow. It doesn't happen like that. Dread is stubborn, my friends. It comes back again and again because of a habit and a pattern. And half the time we don't even notice it. We just start bracing and tightening up. We get snappy, or we're numbing out and avoiding things that we normally do. And we don't even know that it's there. We're just like, oh, we're in the mood today, right? Here's the fastest way I've found to interrupt it when you do notice it. If you don't notice it, when you do, just do this thing. Laugh. I'm serious. It sounds dumb, but it needs to be interrupted with something better. Something opposite of dread would be laughter, right? It's got to become close. So when you catch yourself and your brain doing it again, and you realize you're miserable and you're spinning out in worst case scenarios way before something even happens and you're dreading it, just laugh. Maybe it's like a dinner or a phone call or folding laundry, and you find yourself having these crazy stories about it. It's not because it's funny. It's because it's so familiar. I want you to draw attention to it in a lighthearted way where your guards are going to go down. Like, oh, okay, here we go again. Look at me. Already stressed about the family thing next week, or already mentally losing it. with a conversation I haven't even had yet. Classic me. Of course, I'm all wound up about this. A little laugh breaks the trance, and it gives you just enough space to step outside your story, whatever your brain's been writing, for you to say, hey, this isn't actually happening. I'm just bracing for something in my imagination. It doesn't mean that the task is gone or the conversation still isn't necessary. It just means you're meeting it as yourself. You're more present with what you're making all this stress in your body feel like. It will not be as emotionally exhausting for you. You will not have these worst case version scenarios for yourself as often. And so you will feel most likely better more often with being able to manage your mind around that. That's where your power comes back. You will feel more energy and more power. And I think this is exciting because I have been practicing this for a while, and I want you to be able to do it too. All right? Okay. Before I wrap up, I want to leave you with a couple of journal prompts to take this deeper. You don't need a fancy notebook, just a piece of paper in a couple minutes. But I want you to think about this first question. What's the situation I'm currently dreading? And what's the story I've been telling myself about it? Just write it down. No judgment, just getting honest with yourself. What exactly are you imagining? Who says? What goes wrong? What are you bracing for? Right? And then number 2, what if you believed you could handle whatever happens in any situation? Really? How would you show up differently right now if you believed you could handle any sort of situation, any kind of thing that could happen? Would you feel a little more relaxed? Would you stop rehearsing the worst? Would you take a tiny action? Or would you laugh more at these habits, these old patterns that show up? Let that version of you speak and let it grow. We're going to kind of dial down the dread, and we're going to kind of dial up other ways of doing it. Whatever way speaks to you. Okay? Dread loses its grip the second we see it for what it is. It's like a mental movie you're creating, a horror film. Honestly, a scary movie. It's not real life. When you meet it with awareness and you kind of get curious about it and laugh a little, you change the whole tone of the story, and that becomes the new normal. You're not powerless. You're just creative. Your imagination gets really absurdly creative in a really negative way. So let's do the opposite. If you're that creative, let's use the creativity for something better. How can you undo the story that you have around those things that you always dread and that you've dreaded all along? And how can you use your resources as like your personality and how well you know yourself to make it more fun, to get creative in a better way, to make it faster to move through your life, have more energy, make your days more excellent, have less drama, or even just decide to be neutral about it. That would lessen the dread feeling for sure. Your whole body would be less tense in neutrality, less upset. Instead, you'd feel more relaxed, freer to think, freer to be yourself. You wouldn't be so snappy and trying to numb out. All right. Well, take this into consideration, my friends. I love hearing your feedback. Let me know what you dread. Reach out. And as always, share this with anyone that you thought of who came to mind that could use this, because that is how heaven reaches us, is through each other. All right. Okay. Till next time. Talk to you then.